An ancient demon in this text, first published in Greek in 1837, predicts a man's death, and it comes true. No sealed copy ever existed, since an English translation has been public since 1898. Yet someone pointed an AI at all 26 chapters anyway, asking it to scan every hidden prophecy. What came back is not what anyone expected, what the Testament of Solomon actually is. The Testament of Solomon is a real ancient pseudepigraphon, meaning a text falsely attributed to a famous figure who did not actually write it, in this case, the biblical King Solomon. It survives today in roughly 26 known Greek manuscripts, the earliest reliably dated among them from the 16th century, though scholars agree the underlying composition itself is far older than any surviving physical copy. Chester Charlton McCown, who produced the standard critical edition of the text in 1922, after examining manuscripts held at Mount Athos, Bologna, Holcombe Hall, Jerusalem, London, Milan, Paris, and Vienna, argued persuasively for an early 3rd century AD date for the original compilation, a dating other specialists, including J.B. Frey and Karl Preisendanz, have generally supported since. The text presents itself as Solomon's own first-person account, describing how he came to command a variety of demons and fallen angelic spirits, using a ring given to him directly by the Archangel Michael. Structured largely as a systematic catalog, the longest surviving version runs to 26 chapters and 130 individual sections, describing more than 30 separate demons, their physical appearance, the specific afflictions or forms of harm each one causes, and the angelic countermeasures or incantations capable of binding or driving each one away. That basic structure, part narrative, part detailed reference catalog, is exactly why this specific text keeps resurfacing in viral online claims. What most of those claims skip past entirely is that the text actually does contain genuine, documented prophetic material, passages describing future events that scholars have studied and dated for more than a century. The prophecy Ornias actually made deep into the text, after Solomon has already bound a group of 36 spirits and put them to work constructing his temple. A demon named Ornias reappears and delivers a genuine prediction, telling Solomon that a specific youth will die within 3 days. According to the text, that prophecy comes true exactly as Ornias described it, and Solomon uses the fulfilled prediction as an opportunity to press the demon further about how he actually knew. Ornias explains that demons ascend into the firmament of heaven and there overhear the sentences pronounced over the souls of men, then descend immediately afterward to carry out those same sentences, or else appear to people and demand to be worshipped. The text adds a specific detail that has drawn attention from scholars studying ancient astronomy alongside ancient demonology, describing these same demons as periodically falling from heaven like lightning once they lose their foothold there, phenomena that ordinary people below mistake for falling stars. That passage represents a genuine ancient attempt to explain a real, observed natural phenomenon, meteors streaking across the night sky, by folding it directly into the text's broader demonological framework. This same basic sequence, a demon's prediction, its fulfillment, and a follow-up interrogation, extracting a deeper explanation, repeats as a structural pattern across several other chapters of the text, and it shows up again, almost immediately, in Solomon's dealings with the single most powerful spirit he ever interrogates, the demon who promises to return. In chapter 6, Solomon resumes his questioning of Beelzebul, described throughout the text as the ruling prince among all the demons. Pressed about the fate of the countless other spirits he commands, Beelzebul tells Solomon directly that he holds power over the race of those bound in Tartarus, and that he himself is currently being nurtured in the Red Sea, quietly waiting until the moment he is ready, at which point he will come in triumph. Solomon extracts the specific angelic names capable of thwarting him regardless, most notably a name causing him to tremble and disappear, before commanding the bound demon to cut marble for the temple as a form of forced labor. That specific promise, a defeated but unbroken spirit predicting its own eventual return once it judges the moment right, is a genuinely striking piece of ancient prophetic language, and it has been available in English translation in essentially this same form since Conybeare's 1898 edition. A separate demon interrogated later in the text, a female spirit named Enepsigos, adds an additional layer to this same theme of temporary rather than permanent defeat. Enepsigos tells Solomon she possesses countless different names and can be conjured and appear in a wide range of different forms, including a specific manifestation connected to the god Kronos, and while an angel named Rathanael is identified as capable of thwarting her, the text itself notes directly that the temple built to contain the other bound spirits cannot actually hold her. That detail, one specific demon the text openly admits Solomon's own great building project was never fully capable of containing, adds a genuinely unsettling wrinkle to a catalog otherwise structured around confident, systematic demon management. Understanding that these specific admissions of limited or temporary victory have already been sitting in scholarly translation for well over a century matters directly for evaluating what a chatbot could possibly add to any of it today. The passage about a coming king, born of a virgin, a separate and considerably more famous prophetic passage, appears later in the text, describing a coming cataclysm in which the very vessels Solomon used to imprison his captured demons will shatter, releasing the spirits to roam freely across the earth once again. According to Connie Bare's own 1898 translation, that period of freedom continues specifically until the Son of God is stretched upon the cross, described in the same passage as a king who dominates all spirits, conceived by his mother without contact with man. The passage goes further, stating that the first devil will attempt to tempt this same figure but will not prevail over him, and it includes a specific numerological detail, stating that the number of his name is 644, which the text explicitly connects to the name Emmanuel. That passage, describing a virgin-born king who will be crucified, tempted by the devil without succumbing, and identified through a specific gematria calculation tied to a recognizably Christian title, represents one of the clearest and most heavily discussed prophetic sections found anywhere in the entire Testament of Solomon. It has been available to English readers in Connie Bare's translation since 1898, and it appears in essentially the same form in Dooling's later, more detailed 1983 translation as well, a detail worth hitting subscribe to keep following, since the reason scholars treat this exact prophecy with special caution turns out to be just as interesting as the prophecy itself, and understanding it requires looking directly at how this text was actually assembled over time. Why scholars think this is a later Christian edition. McCown's own 1922 critical edition, still the standard scholarly reference today, argued that the core text originated in the early 3rd century AD, but McCown and later specialists, including Dennis Dooling, identified clear evidence of later Christian material layered on top of an earlier, likely Jewish or mixed Jewish and pagan original composition. That means the surviving manuscripts represent a text that grew and changed across multiple centuries rather than springing fully formed from a single author at a single moment, and the specific virgin birth and crucifixion prophecy sits squarely among the passages scholars point to as evidence of that later Christian layer. Researcher Sarah L. Schwartz, publishing a 2007 paper in the Journal for the Study of the Pseudepigrapha, directly challenged some of the field's older assumptions about the text, arguing scholars needed to reconsider exactly how the different manuscript traditions related to each other and what that meant for dating the earliest recoverable version. Separate scholarly work, including analysis by P.S. Alexander, examining the text's demonology in its wider ancient Mediterranean context, has focused specifically on how the Testament fits alongside other contemporary Jewish and early Christian writing about demons, angels, and exorcism. That kind of ongoing, genuinely unresolved academic debate, real named scholars publishing competing analyses in peer-reviewed journals across nearly a century, is precisely the sign of a text still generating legitimate new research today, research conducted entirely without any chatbot involved. A separate section of the text offers a considerably less famous but equally genuine example of demons predicting their own fate. The 7 stars who predict their own downfall. Chapter 8 of the Testament describes Solomon interrogating a group of 7 spirits identified as the 7 stars of heaven, named deception, strife, fate, distress, error, power, and a 7th called simply the worst. Each spirit explains its own specific area of harm in turn, and one of them, error, makes a specific, self-implicating confession, telling Solomon directly that it was error who led him into the specific mistake of killing his own brothers, a reference scholars connect directly to the biblical account of Solomon's execution of his half-brother Adonijah, described in the first book of Kings. After extracting this confession, Solomon commands all 7 of these star spirits to dig the foundation of his temple, binding them to physical labor as punishment and containment at once. That specific passage functions as its own small prophetic and confessional moment, a demon predicting and explaining its own influence over a real, documented biblical event, tying the surrounding demonology directly back into established scripture in a way that gives the whole catalog a stronger sense of internal, self-reinforcing authority. Later in the same catalog, Solomon interrogates a demon called murder, described as all limbs and no head, who explains a genuinely specific pattern of harm, claiming that whenever an infant 10 days old cries out during the night, this same spirit rushes in and attacks the child through its own voice, an affliction the text states can only be stopped by a sudden flash of lightning. None of this material required any secret modern decoding either, since it has appeared in every complete English translation of the text, published since Conybeare's original 1898 edition. What Grok actually does with a passage like this. Grok is a chatbot built by xAI, Elon Musk's AI company. Like other large language models, it can read a passage of text a person pastes in or asks about, and it can summarize, rephrase, or comment on that passage in plain language. That is a genuinely useful skill. It is not the same thing as decoding a hidden message or performing a scholarly translation from an ancient language. The Testament of Solomon that Grok or any other chatbot reads is not some sealed vault text nobody has seen. English-speaking readers have had access to this text since 1898, when scholar F.C. Conybeare published the first complete English translation in the Jewish Quarterly Review, working from an earlier Greek edition. A more detailed, critically annotated translation followed in 1983, produced by Dennis C. Dooling, and included in James Charlesworth's widely used academic reference collection, the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha. When a video says an AI scanned this text and uncovered its prophecies for the first time, in almost every case the AI is reading one of these two existing, publicly available English translations and restating the same Ornia's prediction, the same Beelzebul promise, or the same virgin birth passage with dramatic framing added on top. A lot of these videos follow a near-identical production pattern. Someone types a leading question into a chatbot, something like, "Ask it to analyze every prophecy in this specific book and describe what is shocking about them." The chatbot responds with dramatic language because that is the tone the question invited, and the response gets read aloud over stock footage with a thumbnail showing a shocked face. None of that process involves new research, new translation work, or new evidence. It involves a chatbot mirroring the emotional tone of whatever question it was asked. A known behavior of these systems that does not indicate anything important was actually uncovered. The ironic detail sitting right inside Grok's own company. Here is a detail worth sitting with directly, since it undercuts the entire premise of an AI secretly scanning this text for the first time. xAI, the same company that builds Grok, also operates its own public encyclopedia project called Grokopedia. That encyclopedia already includes a detailed article specifically covering the Testament of Solomon, citing Conybeare's 1898 translation and Dooling's 1983 critical edition by name, correctly summarizing the text structure, its catalog of more than 30 demons, and its scholarly dating to the early 3rd century AD. That means the exact company behind the chatbot supposedly making a shocking new discovery already maintains a publicly accessible, properly cited reference article covering this exact same ancient text, using the exact same, decades-old scholarly translations. Any claim describing Grok scanning hidden prophecies inside a previously unread Testament of Solomon runs directly into this simple, checkable fact. The underlying material, prophecies included, was never hidden from anyone, including from xAI's own internal reference systems. Understanding exactly how this text reached the public in the first place, long before any chatbot existed, fills in the rest of the picture. The real manuscript history. The modern rediscovery of the Testament of Solomon followed its own genuinely interesting path through European scholarship. German scholar Ferdinand Florenz Fleck first published a version of the Greek text in 1837, working from a 16th century manuscript held in Paris at what is now the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. That publication brought the text back into modern scholarly awareness for the first time in centuries, though it would take several more decades before an English-speaking audience gained direct access to it. F.C. Conybeare's 1898 translation, appearing in the Jewish Quarterly Review, represented the first complete English rendering of the text, based on the available Greek editions of that era, and it already included the Ornia's prophecy, the Beelzebul promise, and the virgin birth passage described earlier in this piece. McCown's subsequent 1922 critical edition significantly expanded the available manuscript base, incorporating additional Greek witnesses discovered at Mount Athos and several other European and Middle Eastern collections, becoming the standard scholarly reference edition still cited by researchers today. Dooling's 1983 translation, built directly on McCown's critical Greek text, remains the most widely used modern English version, appearing in Charlesworth's comprehensive academic collection of pseudepigraphal literature. That specific, well-documented chain of publication, from a single 16th-century Parisian manuscript through successive waves of expanded scholarly editions, gives the Testament of Solomon exactly the kind of transparent, checkable textual history that separates a real ancient document from an unverifiable claim about a secret or newly discovered source. Understanding how that same text went on to shape an entire later tradition of European magical practice fills in why this specific book earned such a dramatic reputation in the first place. How this text shaped later grimoires. The Testament of Solomon never came close to entering any recognized biblical canon, Jewish, Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, and its explicit focus on commanding and negotiating with demons placed it firmly outside anything mainstream religious authorities were ever going to formally endorse. That outsider status did not stop the text from having a genuinely significant afterlife, though, since its core premise, Solomon as a legendary master of demons and spirits who could extract predictions and confessions directly from them, went on to directly inspire an entire later tradition of magical handbooks, collectively known as grimoires. The most famous of these later texts, known as the Key of Solomon, or Clavicula Salomonis, circulated widely across medieval and early modern Europe, describing rituals, seals, and invocations credited to the same legendary king. An even later text called the Lesser Key of Solomon, sometimes referred to by its Latin title Lemegeton, compiled during the 17th century, includes a specific section called the Ars Goetia, listing 72 named demons, complete with illustrated seals and specific ritual instructions for safely summoning and commanding each one. A structure directly descended from the same basic template the original Testament of Solomon had already established more than 1,000 years earlier. That later text organizes its demons using a formal hierarchy of ranks, including kings, dukes, marquises, and princes, a considerably more elaborate bureaucratic structure than the Testament's own catalog, though scholars studying the history of Western ceremonial magic have long traced this recurring structural pattern, named demon, described power, required countermeasure, directly back through this same textual lineage. Solomon's magical seal itself, described across various traditions as either a pentagram or hexagram depending on the specific source, went on to become one of the most widely recognized protective symbols in the entire history of Western ceremonial magic, appearing on amulets, talismans, and building lintels for centuries after the Testament's original composition. That real, well-documented lineage, connecting an obscure 3rd-century pseudepigraphon to an entire later European magical tradition still referenced by occult practitioners today, is precisely why this specific text carries the reputation it does. Nobody needed to invent a secret, forbidden reputation for the Testament of Solomon, or a secret prophecy hidden inside it that only a chatbot could finally reveal. Its own genuine, centuries-long influence on ceremonial magic and demonology, prophecies and all, already earned that reputation the old-fashioned way, through real historical use rather than any modern marketing. What real-eye analysis would actually need to overcome any serious attempt to apply AI directly to the Testament of Solomon's original Greek runs into real, well-documented obstacles immediately. The text survives across roughly 26 separate Greek manuscripts that do not all agree with each other, containing variant readings, later Christian editions, including the specific virgin birth prophecy already discussed, and differences significant enough that McCown's own critical edition had to work eclectically, drawing on multiple separate manuscripts to construct a single usable scholarly text, rather than simply transcribing one clean, uniform original. Translation from ancient Koine Greek into modern English carries its own well-known interpretive challenges, and any AI model working from this material would inherit whatever specific translation choices existed inside its training data, exactly the same limitation affecting AI translation projects applied to other ancient languages. There is also the well-known tendency for large language models to produce confident-sounding answers even when they lack sufficient information to support them, a behavior researchers call hallucination, a risk that applies just as directly to a chatbot describing Solomon's prophecies with total confidence as it does to any other ancient text a chatbot might be asked to analyze. A chatbot like Grok reading a passage from the Testament of Solomon is working entirely from an existing English translation, either Coney Bears from 1898 or Doolings from 1983, with no independent way to check its answer against the original Greek manuscripts scholars like McCown spent years collating by hand. Any credible AI project actually attempting new work on this specific text would need careful human expert review at every step, transparent publication of its methods so other specialists could verify the results, and real caution about announcing findings before they had actually been checked against the full manuscript tradition. A far less exciting process than a viral video promising a shocking new prophecy scan, but the only version of this story that would genuinely hold up to scrutiny. Verdict here is where things actually stand. The Testament of Solomon is a real, well-documented ancient pseudepigraphon, most likely originally composed in the early 3rd century AD and layered with later Christian additions across the centuries that followed, surviving today in roughly 26 Greek manuscripts and properly translated into English, first by F.C. Conybeare in 1898, and later, more thoroughly, by Dennis Dooling in 1983. It genuinely does contain real prophetic material, including the demon Ornias correctly predicting a young man's death within 3 days, the demon prince Beelzebul promising his own eventual return once he is ready to come in triumph, a separate spirit named Enepsigos, openly described as too powerful for Solomon's own temple to fully contain, and a widely studied passage describing a coming king born of a virgin who will be crucified, tempted without succumbing, and identified through the number 644, connected to the name Emmanuel, a passage most scholars treat as a later Christian addition layered onto the text's earlier core. A chatbot reading these same passages out loud in dramatic language is not the same thing as a scientific discovery, even when a video calls it one, a point made especially clear by the fact that XAI's own Grokopedia project already hosts a properly cited, scholarly summary of this exact text. The Testament's real significance lies in its centuries-long, extensively documented influence on later Western magical literature, including the Key of Solomon and the Ars Goetia, and in the genuine, ongoing academic debate scholars continue having over its precise origin and its layered composition history. Given how much of this material, prophecies included, has already been public, translated, cited, and actively studied for well over a century, an AI chatbot restating an existing English translation with a dramatic tone does not represent a forbidden secret finally coming to light. It represents exactly what it looks like, a language model doing reading comprehension on a text any curious person could already find, read, and study freely for themselves. If you want more deep dives that separate what is actually real from what is just a good headline, subscribing costs nothing and keeps this channel chasing down stories exactly like it.